Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Physio Scout Injury Wrap Up. I'm glad to be joined by Jared. Jared, how are you?
Doing well. We're on opposite time schedules today. Usually I'm doing this at night. You're doing it in the morning, but I got my early morning coffee and we're ready to rock and roll.
Yes, absolutely. I've just come back from Byron Bay for Australian viewers, so couldn't do it on the Monday morning on my side. So Jared's been kind enough to adjust for my schedule. Yeah, despite it being like 6:30 there. So highly appreciated, Jared. But yeah, how's your week been?
Going well. Nice to have some Premier League action back. Definitely a pretty eventful weekend. Arsenal doing their best to give up their title contention right now. So obviously this week playing Man City, that will be a massive game and it'd be fun to watch just as a neutral fan. How about yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, no. I obviously great to have the Premier League back. Sort of caught it towards most of the games actually. So exciting to have it back and exciting to have a title race again. I was going to pick up a bottle and drink out of it, but I don't have a bottle near me. So thanks Chelsea on your side as well for keeping it alive.
Yeah, that was rough.
Yeah,
Not gonna
but
lie.
it's great for the neutral. Um, but yes, back to work, back to physio scout duties, and awesome to be back, honestly. Perfect amount of time away. But yeah, I mean, now that we're talking about the Premier League over the weekend, a few talking points that actually got a lot of attention, viewership, and interaction. Again, we had Nico O'Reilly, which is one of the big talking points for Man City as well as fantasy football players. Obviously, a lot of people have Nico O'Reilly after his amazing start to the season. A little bit of an innocuous one in terms of how he got injured. We can't tell fully exactly which mechanism happened or how it happened, but we do know it's more so hamstring. Isn't that right, Jared?
Correct. Yeah. All reports and just watching the game, just around the 60th minute, he had like a sprint action, a foul action, and then pretty soon after that, kind of signaled over to the bench, and you can kind of see him doing that classic, bending his knees, stretching out the hamstring, stuff like that. But he came off pretty quick, so obviously there's something there. Went straight into the tunnel, but was also seen walking around after the game. And even as early as this morning, I saw reports that he was participating in some kind of activation drills in training. Um, Obviously, that could literally mean anything because stretching out on a yoga mat is far from playing in games. But
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of kind of mixed signals depending on how you want to look at it. But there was definitely something that happened, and the fact that he came off so quickly, and immediately kind of signaled to the bench. Yeah, that's yeah, definitely cause for concern.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It was a little bit of a weird one because he did try to play on for a little bit, but he very much clearly was pointing towards his biceps femoris, towards the back, and usually that is the most commonly injured hamstring muscle. And because it was more so mid portion, not that it indicates recovery time at all, but I would be less worried in terms of a full blown recovery in terms of towards the higher grades. But as you said, activation drills, more so exposure and team training this morning, as you did say, is a good sign that he's not away from the squad. So yes, it brings me more of a concern for the low grade area. So that grade one or hamstring tightness. I wouldn't be surprised if he's back this weekend, to be honest. But it's more of a wait and see. But yeah, did you want to talk about his tactical role? What could have happened, and I guess because you are well written in this space, right? Is there any sort of tactical changes or elements that could have contributed to this injury?
Yeah, I think just anytime you have that outside back who's making repetitive runs up and down the flank, that's obviously going to put a little bit more overload on the hamstrings. What's a little bit more unique about him is he almost kind of hangs out as like a six or an eight, kind of occupying that left-sided half space. But he makes a lot of underlapping runs, which is interesting. Traditionally you'll see fullbacks doing those overlapping runs more on the wing. But again, watching him play Chelsea the other day, he was constantly making underlapping runs inside, right outside the six, and just he was very dangerous while he was playing. So again, just from a mechanical standpoint on the hamstring, a lot of repetitive high intensity sprinting from that half space area into the box, but also just making recovery runs as well for his defensive duty. So I think that has a definitely a portion of as to what causes injury for him.
Absolutely, yeah, and his role is very unique to honestly one of the most, if not the most unique, um, roles within the Premier League. You can see him right next to Haaland a few times.
Hmm.
So in terms of demands of his game, I'm surprised he's honestly lasted this long without any sort of niggle. So he's done really well to get to this point, but hopefully it's just a hamstring low grade injury or a tightness thing. So let's wait and see. But I think it's more so on the positive side if we were to fully guess. Next one I do want to move on to another big talking point through the weekend was Cristian Romero for Spurs, who really funny one actually. After getting pushed over, Kinski, his own goalkeeper, splurged into his knee, and we did report on it on Physio Scout, presuming a MCL injury, which turned out to be correct. And he is looking to be out towards that 6 to 8 week region. Jared, looking at it, it was a pretty nasty one, wasn't it? And I guess what does this look like in terms of his recovery?
Absolutely. And I think, initial fears were, obviously for ACL and other structures in the knee. I think if you look at the slow-mo, it looks like right as he got hit, his foot didn't seem to be fully planted on the ground, which I think, those milliseconds, I think spared him from a pretty significant knee injury. But nonetheless, very, very nasty looking on the field when it happened. And again, just for him, MCL is super important. He's a very athletic center back. He's always, everybody knows who watches, makes a ton of tackles. He really needs to have a good amount of stability in that knee to come back to play. So also this time of the season for him, it's going to be okay. Does he help Tottenham try to get out of relegation? Does he fight back to get on the pitch quicker? Or is he saying, hey, this season's kind of a wash right now, and I
Yeah.
got the World Cup coming up in a couple months, so that will be interesting to watch just how his rehab unfolds. He's a very passionate guy. I guess I wouldn't be surprised either way to see him back, earlier to try to help them stave off relegation. But again, from a mechanical perspective, he definitely needs to regain stability in that knee before he gets back to his best.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very interesting talking point, actually, that Spurs point, because you people are questioning whether these players are in it for the long run, right? Whether they actually do want to play for Spurs at the moment, whether they want to be part of the dogfight or the relegation battle. Obviously, the new manager, De Zerbi, coming in does provide a little bit of a flare up, but who knows? I think in this case, Romero. Might be looking towards the World Cup and just thinking, I'm going to have offers anyway. And I don't think there's any reason from his point of view to rush things back. Obviously, he's captain and he wants to do the best for a club, but does he want to put his World Cup campaign at risk? I'm not so sure. But yeah, so a lot of the audience might be asking the MCL, obviously high velocity type of injury, how it happened. They may be resorting straight into thinking that Romero may need surgery. The good thing is that the MCL has quite good blood supply, isn't that right, Jared? And a lot of the time is managed conservatively.
Correct. Yeah, in most high level sports injuries, or even just kind of like lower level sports medicine injuries, if the MCL is injured in isolation, the goal is always to try to go conservative and let it heal on its own. Like you mentioned, really good blood supply, and just from an anatomical perspective, it sits outside the knee joint again, which is also super important from a healing standpoint. So, yeah, if it truly is just an isolated MCL injury, he's not going to have surgery. It's just going to recover conservatively. And yeah, like you said earlier, hopefully we see him back in that kind of 4 to 6 week timeline.
Yep, yep. Which points more so towards that grade two mark, which is great. But yes, moving on, we've got Bukayo Saka. So he did play the Carabao Cup, but has not played for England or Arsenal, right? Again, news is a little bit unclear, right? Would you say it's more so of a new injury, a recurrence of a hamstring injury? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so anytime we're seeing a multiple week absence, we just talked about Nico O'Reilly that if it is a tightness grade one, he potentially could be back within a week or so. The fact that he's missed up to 3 weeks of game time, multiple important games, at the very least, if it is a soft tissue injury, it's likely in that grade two category. Remember, he had a hamstring injury earlier in the year. Could that be a recurrence of that? Could be having any other complications from that? As we know, Arsenal and Arteta don't give out a ton of information, but if we just look at just the timeline itself, that at least puts us in like some type of grade two muscular injury, unless there's something else completely new that we don't even know about. So.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell these ones, especially with Arsenal. Considering a couple of weeks ago when we did record, there was a bunch of different niggles and types of muscle injuries that we don't even know about, and half of them returned to the squad, half of them started. But people like Saka, people like Timber as well, has been a little bit, I guess, unknown, unclear, which is frustrating for us, but also it must be quite frustrating for Arsenal fans. But talking more so on Urian Timber, right? He hasn't, also same as Saka, he hasn't played since the Carabao Cup. It was classified and it looked definitely like more of an adductor groin injury, right? Do you want to talk more so because it's a little bit more unclear his attacking role within the side or defensive role or overall playing style could have contributed to its injury, or do you want anything to comment based off that?
Yeah, I guess two quick things. So for Saka and Timber, again, if it is a re-aggravation or delayed healing of the muscle injuries that they've had, it could mean that there's some tendon involvement. Whether it's at the kind of proximal or higher up attachment site, that can complicate the rehab just from a pain standpoint, a healing standpoint, but also a performance standpoint. So keep that in mind. In terms of Timber's role, again, very similar to O'Reilly in some ways. He doesn't have the kind of explosive nature that O'Reilly is, but
Mhm.
he's constantly in the box, a variety of underlapping and overlapping runs. And obviously for Arsenal, it's tough because when him and Saka are both healthy, they really kind of dominate that right side, really control the game on that right side. So it's no surprise as to why they've been struggling a little bit more lately.
Mhm.
But again, the adductor plays such a high role in kind of lateral, kind of side to side movement,
Yeah.
stuff like that. And again, the fact that he can play inside and outside as an outside back, yeah, understandable why the why an adductor injury would continue to keep him sidelined.
Absolutely. And obviously it does correlate with Arsenal's form or I guess lack of convincingness when in terms of getting the victory over the line. But yeah, groin injuries are quite they're a hassle to deal with. They're a lot of football players get it because it's one of, if not the most used muscles when you're kicking a ball, right? And especially for a person like Timber who's crossing it in, who's pivoting, who's doing a lot of lateral movements. The groin area especially takes the brunt of things, and unfortunately, it looks like it has taken a toll on him. And again, unclear on when he's going to come back, but hopefully sooner rather than later for Arsenal. Um, Moving on, we've got Newcastle. So Bruno Guimarães, uh, again, talking more on the tactical role, very, very high. It seems to be a bit of a trend here. A lot of demand and a lot of things that are expected of Bruno here. He's a box midfielder and high load on his, I guess, his muscles overall, but especially his hamstring. And he is such an integral player to this Newcastle side. He's a linchpin. He makes everything happen, right? For his absence, it's a pretty lengthy one. What are your thoughts on his injury so far?
Definitely. So in terms of classification, yeah, like we've said a few times, definitely in that grade two category. He's been out at this point over 2 months. I shouldn't say funny enough, but I guess his hamstring is doing well, but it was reported this weekend that he missed out on the games due to a diagnosis of mumps. So that's
Mm,
yeah, just unfortunate timing for him,
yeah.
and hopefully for Newcastle, he's not delayed too much longer.
Yep.
Again, interesting in terms of just diagnosis of these injuries. Is it just the muscle itself? Is it the muscle and the tendon? Is it more the tendon itself? My guess with him is probably in that kind of, they classify it, 2A, 2B, 2C, but he's probably in that 2B range,
Mhm.
in terms of the muscle and the tendon that's involved. So I'd be happy to talk about the surgical side more because I think, we've seen that more often in soccer players where, I'm sorry, football players,
Mhm.
um, where they're getting surgery for these hamstring injuries. But again, Bruno Guimarães did not, but a player like Saka, even last year, Gabriel did. Again, without knowing all the information, my guess is because there was more tendon involvement in their injuries, which required some type of surgical procedure, versus, for Bruno Guimaraes, hopefully just more of the muscle belly itself, and which
Mhm.
allowed him to heal a little bit more conservatively.
Absolutely, yeah, fully agree with everything that you said there. Some another interesting point on a player. If we jolted back to the Spurs, I do want to talk about is James Madison. Viral videos have been going around in terms of his muscle wasting or his lack of muscle around that ACL area his quad mainly. Especially, I think it was this video of him doing a lateral shuffle, right? He's about 6 or 7, 9 months post his surgery. Um, Typically with ACL surgeries, you do see a lot of muscle wasting, right? A lot of muscle wasting, and it takes time for you to build back up that muscle, and also, yeah, build back up the muscle to be able to go into a football match nice and confidently. But it's not unheard of. It's we've seen these pictures before of players having, muscle deficits, but return quite normally, return quite well. But again, he's still a little bit, he's 7 months in. He's not even close to being fully back to football yet. And it's actually quite good that we're seeing videos of him doing these lateral shuffles and doing these sports specific training stuff. But yeah, like we won't see Madison until we see there isn't too much asymmetry between left and right leg. There'll be force plate testing, there'll be all these machines and all these things that will test in terms of his strength, his velocity in terms of movements, as well as his plyometric movements. Yeah, Jared, like, is there anything to worry about in this case in James Madison?
No, like you said, timeline wise, he's right on schedule, getting back to field activities, practice activities, stuff like that. But yeah, pretty much the gold standard is around 9 months, so that's still 2 full months of rehab that he's away from potentially getting back to any, serious game or high level practice activities.
Mm,
Um, for all the kind of more science and research nerds out there like myself and so on,
mm,
there's plenty of ACL research that go along with just running mechanics in general. And yeah, they do show that even after 12 months post-operatively, these high level athletes are still experiencing a deficit in muscle size between the injured leg and the non-injured leg. So again,
mm,
seeing it from a visual perspective is really not that uncommon at this point. Another good example that comes to mind is Tyrone Mings,
yeah,
massive center back from
that's
from
right.
Villa.
Mm,
Yeah, you could just watch for 2 minutes on TV and you could see that his injured side just did not look the same when he got back. So,
exactly.
um, like you said, very common that this is happening, but doesn't necessarily equate to a cause for concern for his long-term outlook.
No, not at all. Not at all. Personally, I know from my ACL, like I was quite like in terms of photos, you could see there was a big deficit, but no, not at all. If like comparing to Madison's playing style, but I did only feel confident like from 12 months onwards, and you see a lot of players like feeling like even close to their former self around that 24-month mark, that 2 year mark where they could actually play to similar levels, maybe even better levels than they were previously. Maybe apart from Van Dijk, who sort of just, took it off the rein and smashed it. But yeah, no, not uncommon, for sure. Yeah, so a little bit of a delay getting the Reece James Substack out. But I will definitely get back to it. I think both of us have just had other commitments, but that's going to be a really interesting read. I promise you that. A little bit sort of a similar vibe to the Nico O'Reilly stuff and the Jurian Timber stuff, but I think Reece James is more of an interesting case, so look out for that. In terms of Alexander Isaac, have you got anything to comment on future stuff to look out for?
Of course. Yeah, so he obviously had a pretty significant injury a little while ago. Um, I won't spoil the articles too much, but it
Mhm.
talks about, you know, the fibula itself, but some other structures that were likely injured during the tackle that he experienced, and then why he had surgery, and then also just a little bit about his playing style. He tends to be a striker who makes kind of these curved runs off of center backs, off their shoulders, stuff like that. So the article will dive into kind of like why the area that he got injured is so important for him to return to some of that top form. So obviously been an interesting season for him. He's I guess you could say barely played, but if he comes back and can give them some pretty solid minutes, that's really going to be a big boost for Liverpool fighting for the top four. So
For
um,
sure.
I know I definitely will be watching to see just how he recovers from this long layoff.
Absolutely. And another talking point in terms of a future thing to look out for is the Eze article, the calf specific protocol, and yeah, so important to the Arsenal team because of his, I guess, dynamic nature and his ability to just be able to free roam. And I think that's a big factor of why Arsenal are also not performing as well. His absence. And like most muscular injuries, the calf muscle is very prone to being I guess, re-injured, right? So, what does it take for Eze to come back?
Yeah, so good news is he did come back against Bournemouth over the weekend. Unfortunately, it was not enough for them to get
Mhm.
over the line, but
Mhm.
yeah, you can just see some of his dynamic playmaking. I think there was a moment in the match where he made this just like incredible turn and just made it look so effortlessly, but it opened up just like loads of space for the attack. So yeah, they definitely need him for sure. He's definitely something that they do not have otherwise without him. Um, One thing we kind of look at when we're looking at calf injuries in general, and a lot of people are surprised to hear that, but you can start kind of retraining and kind of rehabbing these muscles as early as 3 days after the injury. We actually really want to get them moving as quickly as possible. So, what we'll probably highlight in future articles or talk about a little bit more on here is just some kind of specific return to play metrics, stuff like that. But, if in terms of muscle, it's about just getting blood flow, getting kind of some reinnervation to the area.
Mhm.
Then it's working on strength, and then it's working on what we call plyometric activities, so jumping, landing, stuff like that. Um, Building on each phase from one week to another, and then finally getting back into running drills, sprinting drills, and then back to game and practice stuff. As Sirhan mentioned, a muscle that's highly at risk for re-injury, and that 3 to 6 week mark post-injury, when they're starting plyometrics, starting running, is when they're most likely to re-aggravate that injury. So good news is he survived the game, and let's hope he can stay in the field for this upcoming Man City match.
Absolutely. Yeah. Big game changer for Arsenal.
Yeah.
But yeah, great summary, Jared. I think that goes through all the players that we needed to cover this weekend. Um, Yeah, big players and big news. And it has been quieter in terms of the actual amount of injuries, in terms of specific, like, I guess, let's say, higher grade injuries recently. But we have had a couple more so in recent times. But yeah, we hope you enjoyed the podcast. We have a couple questions come through just for both of us to answer. And one person one, actually, and as well as another thing that we've also sort of touched on already. What do you think of the recent injuries at Arsenal? I mean, do you want to start off first and I can just jump onto it?
Yeah, and I think I'll definitely do like a kind of end of season wrap up stuff like
Yeah.
that. But again, we've always talked about from the beginning, how do tactical game plans influence injury risk? And
Mhm.
I mean, are, there's been some articles out about in terms of just the Premier League going a little bit more direct this year, but I don't
Mm,
think Arsenal has followed suit with that as much. So they're still playing that kind of high intensity press stuff like that. Arteta's known not to rotate teams as much as often. And
Mm,
again, this has been multiple years in a row now that they've kind of stumbled down the line, whether it's fatigue, whether it's injury, stuff like that. Um, so again, I'm biased because obviously that's what I'm kind of looking at in these injuries and stuff like that. But there
mm,
absolutely has to be some tactical reasons as to why they're just faltering at the end, and then having these sustained injuries, whether it just be long-term surgical injuries or just these constant kind of niggles and nags, like you kind of mentioned earlier with Saka and Timber.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. And these are all physical players too. If you see, obviously a lot of the Premier League has adapted to more physical, dominant playing or players overall. But I could only imagine what training would be like as well. These players, like you can never really take that sort of, I guess, thing out of proportion, and we're unable to measure exactly what happens at training. But I could only imagine it'd be quite intense as well. So things behind the scenes we're really unsure of that can contribute to these injuries. But yep, who knows? Who knows? Um, but yes, we have another question coming from Rio Nike, which is a little bit of a personal one. I mean, I can start off because I'm a little bit more recent than you. The question is, what's the hardest struggle you faced getting into the industry after uni? Right? So maybe a little bit more of a throwback for you, Jared, or more maybe something you've learned recently. But for me, the hardest struggle, I would say I've been pretty fortunate to be put in a team that's really pro in terms of team bonding, in terms of growing new grads, in terms of growing people into what they would assume a good physio would be. Their motto is actually better people make better physios. So I think first and foremost, you have to be a good person and be an empath to be able to be successful in the industry. But the hardest struggle, I would say, honestly, would be just a clinical aspect of it. You, at the moment, I think just exposure to things and your first 6 months are always going to be the toughest. If I'm thinking more recent thought, toughest in the sense that all of these things are moving so quickly. It's so completely different in terms of uni to what actual private practice, for example, is like. So in terms of in a new grad aspect, I would say the toughest struggle is actually the first 6 months or the first 12 months because there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn. And you're in for a rude shock, but as long as you're within the right environment, you'll thrive off it. Jared, I guess, how would you answer that question?
Are you insinuating I'm a little older than you, Sirhan,
I
by
mean, I don't know
response?
your age, so yeah, we're insinuating that, but I'm sure you're young as a child.
Yeah, so I've been a PT for 8 years or physio for 8 years. So I think really in any kind of, I guess first it's figuring out what you want in terms of like setting and stuff like that, and then just trying to get as early exposure to it as possible. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure if this individual is looking to get into sports settings, stuff like that. But if let's say that you are, like, yeah, you have to get exposure into the environment as quickly as you can. That may be, taking a volunteer role, that may be working extra hours outside of your normal clinic job. But as soon as you start to make some internal connections into these teams and these leagues, into these environments, I personally don't work with professional sports or anything like that, but I have some close friends who do. And again, they started their journey, 5 years before they even got a job opportunity or stuff like that.
Yeah,
So I would say if that's truly your long-term goal into sports, physical therapy, yeah, start the process as early as you can, and just be prepared to, probably take some unpaid opportunities, but you make those lifelong connections, and that's only going to help you moving forward. So,
absolutely. Yeah, highly agree. Highly agree. So yeah, different points here. Did different sort of, I guess, aspects of struggles and then within the industry. But yeah, let's move on to the next question. Um, a bit of an interesting question, actually. I'm not sure if you have an instant answer to this. I'm trying to think of an answer right now, but what do you think is the hardest injury to diagnose and why?
hmm.
It's a niche one. It's a niche one. I've never had to think of that before. But does anything come into mind? You don't even have to answer it if you don't have anything, but Yeah, what's been difficult, or an area of your body which like you find a little bit harder than others, or more aspects to it?
Yeah, I guess I'll answer this in two ways. So I give the athletic trainers a ton of credit, for the guys and gals that you see get onto the field as soon as an injury happens. Because for me, as a sports physical therapist, I don't see athletes until maybe weeks or,
Mhm.
at the very least a week after a particular injury has happened. So
Mhm.
I can only imagine how tough it is to make that on-field diagnosis. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like there's a lot of, especially in these high-level Premier League games, there's pressure from the fans, pressure from the team, stuff like that. So for me, what comes to mind is that very acute on-field injury, I would say would probably be extremely tough to diagnose and also just to confidently diagnose as well. You know what I mean? You obviously either way, it's bad if say a player is fine and he's hurt and then he goes out, gets more hurt,
Mhm.
or you think he's hurt, but then it turns out he was fine, and then that messes up the match and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In terms
Yeah.
of the area of the body, in the clinic, the spine stuff is always just very, very tricky. Whether it's nerve impingements, disc issues, stuff like that. Anything kind of neck or lower back, which is what I see a lot of in my particular clinic. It can be very tricky to diagnose. So.
Mm-mm. Yeah, great answer. I'm gonna answer this in a cop-out way, but also is quite true. I think the hardest injury to diagnose is the injuries without a diagnosis. And what I mean by that is a lot of the time people come in with some sort of niggle, some sort of impingy sort of feeling, right? But there a lot of the time there isn't anything to sort of give in terms of an exact diagnosis. And sometimes it's okay not to have an exact diagnosis. Giving them an impairment to work off and try to improve based on that, whether it's range of motion, whether it's strength, whether it's just ongoing pain. A lot of the time there is a diagnosis, but sometimes you just have to work off the impairment. And what I get sort of taught to do is see the impairment for what it is within your assessment, and then figure out how you can actually improve upon that impairment. So, in terms of really funneling yourself into a diagnosis, find what the client or the patient wants out of the appointment, and then funnel your information through that. If they want a diagnosis, sure, you can add a word like an impingement after, but a lot of the time you have to just treat the impairment. And that's what I find that the hardest is just like trying, if they want a diagnosis, a lot of the time it's scarier, or the word or the phrase is scarier than what they it actually should be, right? So just I guess in terms of how you deliver the message, or the diagnosis or the prognosis is quite important in this sense. You sort of get what I'm saying, Jared?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we also live in a day and age where, people are wanting specific answers, you know what I mean?
Mm,
That, pain and injury is such a complex topic. And
mm,
it's like people come thinking like, okay, like you're gonna tell me exactly what is wrong with me.
mm,
And a lot of times, like we have a good guess, we may be 90, 95% sure, but
mm.
yeah. So like you said, it's really about crafting how you speak to a patient and just how you deliver the information to say, okay, we have a strong theory that this is what's going on, but regardless, we're going to work on your strength deficits, your flexibility deficits, and like you mentioned, just focus on more the impairments versus the specific diagnosis.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have a couple more questions, but unfortunately, this Zoom meeting will end. I do want to point out a couple things. Jared, nice jacket from Ireland. Represent.
My
Yeah,
goal is to wear a different jersey every episode. So far I'm
very
three for
nice,
three. So
very nice.
stay tuned.
Yes, and as you probably would have noticed by now, Jared also got his mic working. So, a plus to the podcast and a plus to whatever he does on his media side. So, yeah, how do you feel?
Feels official. So
Yeah,
I guess we're now officially a podcast.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But apart from that, if there's nothing else, let's wrap this up. Thank you. Thank you for joining the podcast again. Injury wrap up. Sorry about last week. We did have an Easter break, but going into the next weeks and into the World Cup, these will be a lot more frequent and hopefully be benefit to your daily drive or your home environment. But we thank you for listening. If you do like us, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Give Jared's channel a look out. Do you want to plug real quickly?
Absolutely. And yeah, we appreciate the questions. Definitely continue to get them out to Sirhan or myself because it just makes the podcast a little bit more interactive, and we're happy to talk about this stuff for a while. So you can follow me at Football Physio Council on Instagram.
Yeah, great stuff. And again, you'll see more of him on the channel or the Instagram or however you choose to get your content. Substack will be coming out again on that Isaac as well as Reece James, which is an absolute interesting read, which I've read myself, but it's just putting into the graphics to be able to actually take in quite easily. But we thank you for your support. And apart from that, I'm quite happy to wrap it up. So, Jared, thank you for joining me. And thank you guys for joining us. And we look forward to catching you next week. Bye for now.